The chant "Free Palestine" has echoed through the streets of every major city, people demanding an end to the suffering of the Gazan people. But if you dared to voice a different opinion, you would be shouted down, called names, and even physically attacked, all in the name of standing up to evil and injustice. And yet, as the echoes of gunfire ring out across Africa, as the tears of mothers burying their children soak the earth, as the light of innocent souls are snuffed out, these same voices who claim to stand up for justice fall eerily silent. Today, on Deep Thought, we ask why the persecution of Christians is being ignored. The persecution of Christians isn't confined to one area or one type of government, it's a global issue. According to Open Doors, over 380 million Christians around the world now live under what they call high levels of persecution or discrimination. That's roughly 1 in every 7 Christians. In the past year alone, thousands have been killed for their faith. Churches have been bombed, villages have been burned, and families have been displaced simply for refusing to deny the name of Christ. The World Watch List 2025, one of the most detailed studies on religious persecution, reported more than 4,000 Christians killed for their faith between October 2023 and September 2024. Nearly 70% of those deaths happened in Nigeria, where extremist groups and militants target Christian communities. According to sources including the Inter-Society, Open Doors, and the Atlantic Post, between 2009 and 2025, as many as 225,000 Christians may have been killed in Nigeria alone. These are not random victims of war, they are deliberately targeted. Islamist groups like Boko Haram aim to eradicate Christianity from Africa. Along with their ISIS counterpart ISWAP, they attack churches, pastors, aid workers, and school children. They have killed tens of thousands of Christians and even Muslims who refuse to submit to their ideology. In 2014, Boko Haram declared an Islamic caliphate, and in 2015, they declared their allegiances to ISIS. Their goal? To establish an Islamic state and eliminate Western and Christian influence entirely. Their name literally translates to Western education is forbidden. There is also the Fulani militia, armed factions of Muslim nomadic herders who have killed thousands and displaced hundreds of thousands more. It is important to note that not all Fulani are violent, but these militant factions have waged a campaign of terror across Nigeria's middle belt, and Christians are often their main targets. But the danger reaches far beyond Africa. In North Korea, simply being caught with a Bible can mean execution or life in a prison camp.
어느 날 바이브가 우리 집에 와서 집을 조사했어요. 그리고 내가 손으로 쓴 성경 구절 그 쪽지들을 발견했어요. 그들은 내게 여러 말로 고함을 지르고 남편과 나와 아이들을 모두 강제 수용소로 끌고 갔어요. 부모님과 아이들까지 수용소로 끌려가서 심한 노동을 해야만 했어요. 이제는 다 북한에 있지 않거나
지금같이 힘든 상황에 북한 성도들이 절망하기는 오히려 한마음 한뜻으로 북한의 복음화를 위한 좋은 기회라고 말합니다. 저는 이 말을 듣고 너무나도 흥분되고 감격되었습니다. 우리는 국제사회가 북한에 압력을 가하는 것은 오직 한 가지 해결책은 예수 그리스도의 사랑과 은혜입니다. 북한 성도들이 기도하고 있는 것은 그들이 친구들과 가족들이 그리스도를 아는 것입니다. 그들은 자신들을 핍박하는 자들을 위해서도 기도하고 있습니다. 우리는 기적의 하나님을 섬기고 있습니다. 아멘.
And human rights organizations estimate that between 50 and 70,000 Christians are in prisons today. In one documented case from 2009, an entire family, including their 2-year-old child, were sentenced to life in a prison camp after authorities discovered a Bible in their home. Survivors describe awful methods of torture: being hung upside down from your legs, being forced to squat hundreds of times a day, having pepper liquid poured up your nose, and being forced to watch the torture or execution of other prisoners. And there's the horrific account of what happens to the female prisoners. In the province of Hamgyong, investigators documented 32 counts of sexual violence and forced abortions in pre-prison camps. Pregnant women were reportedly injected with substances to induce birth. And when children were born alive, guards suffocated the newborns before forcing the women back to work. Now, these are not easy words to hear, but they must be spoken, because this is happening right now all around the world, and sadly, this is just the tip of the iceberg. In Pakistan, accusations of blasphemy can cost you your life. In Iran and Afghanistan, converting from Islam is an act of treason. In China, churches are demolished, pastors imprisoned, and believers forced underground under the eye of a surveillance state. From Africa to Asia, and even a little bit in the West now, these patterns remain the same. Faith is met with violence, belief is met with denial, and conviction is met with silence. These are not isolated tragedies. They form part of a quiet, ongoing crisis, the largest persecution of any faith group in the world. And yet, in the media, in politics, and even in activism, this suffering barely exists. And why? Why does the media turn its back on the most persecuted believers on earth? To understand why this is being ignored, we have to turn to an unlikely place, the home of waffles, beer, and chocolate: Belgium. In 2020, Matthias Desmet, a professor of psychology at Ghent University, popularized the concept of mass formation psychosis. During the COVID pandemic, Desmet noticed that strange social patterns, lockdowns, censorship of dissent, and intense conformity to authority were all met with almost total obedience. He described this as a kind of mass hypnosis, a psychological state where individuals lose the ability to think critically, becoming blind to what they lose while hyper-focusing on what they are told to see. Desmet compared these dynamics to those that once allowed totalitarian regimes under Hitler and Stalin to rise. He outlined 4 social psychological conditions that make mass formation possible. 1. Lack of social bonds or isolation. People feel disconnected and lonely. Long before COVID, social atomization and digital life had eroded communities, but lockdowns deepened that feeling. 2. Lack of meaning or purpose. Modern life leaves many adrift. Secularizations, bureaucratic systems, and loss of shared values strip away significance. 3. Free-floating anxiety and discontent. A general sense of unease without a clear object. Things like economic instability, climate fear, and political division can create a constant yet undefined anxiety. And finally, 4. Free-floating frustration and aggression. People feel powerless and angry but have no clear outlet. That emotion builds, waiting for direction. Once these conditions exist, a narrative tends to emerge, often supplied by an authority and amplified by the media, giving this anxiety a name and a target. People then accept this narrative because it gives their fear meaning and their struggle purpose. During COVID, that narrative revolved around safety and control, but that same psychological process can appear anywhere, especially in activism. When the cry "Free Palestine" sweeps through the streets, it carries a moral conviction. but it also forms a perfect structure for mass formation. A unifying cause, channeling free-floating anxiety, offering belonging and moral clarity. And, just like in Desmond's model, those outside the narrative, the dissenters or the uninformed, then become the enemy. There is cognitive narrowing, where one's attention is locked onto a singular issue while ignoring the collateral damage around it. There is the loss of rational evaluation, where evidence against the narrative is just dismissed. Then there is the moral elevation of conformity. Compliance becomes a moral duty. Then there is the blindness to loss, where people tolerate harm without genuinely perceiving it. You can replace COVID with any powerful ideology and the same dynamic appears. A collective belief so strong it blinds its followers to contradictions. A moral high ground so absolute that self-reflection feels like treason. That blindness, more than malice, explains how tragedy goes unseen. How the sufferings of millions of persecuted Christians can exist along global cries for justice and yet receive silence. Because when the world is hypnotized by one moral narrative, it often loses sight of the other. And this is where narrative becomes everything. The story that people rally behind gives meaning, belonging, and moral clarity that can also conceal manipulation. Once a moral cause captures the collective imagination, it becomes fertile ground for influence. Media, political groups, and activists can shape, steer, or influence the outrage without really being aware of it. Independent journalists like Nick Shirley and Nate Friedman have raised questions about organized funding networks and coordinated activism behind parts of these movements and have exposed paid protesters and investors. And whether the claim holds or not, the pattern is clear. Empathy can be guided, shaped, and monetized until it becomes something else, something much more sinister. And perhaps part of the reason that the Christian suffering is ignored is cultural as well. For many in the modern West, Christianity is seen not as a faith of the persecuted, but as a symbol of old power, of the establishment of the empire of history's oppressors. To acknowledge Christians as victims, especially in places like Africa and the Middle East, would challenge their moral hierarchy. So their suffering doesn't fit the story. It's inconvenient for a world that defines its virtue through opposition to the West, even when Christianity itself was born in the East, among the marginalized and spread through persecution. That, I think, is the final layer in the blindness, when ideology, culture, and psychology all align to make compassion selective and silence the suffering that doesn't serve the narrative. Desmond warns that if mass formation continues unchecked, it becomes something far more dangerous than obedience. It becomes totalitarianism, not the kind ruled by an iron fist or secret police, but a system sustained by ideological hypnosis, where people no longer need to be forced because they already believe. In this model, it begins with disconnection. Disconnection breeds anxiety. Anxiety demands a unifying story, and the story creates a hypnotic collective. Then, that collective, once it is fused with power, becomes a totalitarian system, one that silences anything that doesn't fit the story. But Desmond offered a way out. He said mass formation can only be broken if people continue to speak the truth calmly, courageously, and without hatred, even when they stand alone. Desmond said that roughly 20 to 30 people will be fully hypnotized and unreachable. Another 40 to 60% will follow along passively, and a small 10 to 20%, the ones who see, must speak out, because as Desmond said, speaking out breaks the hypnosis. And this is where we find ourselves today, surrounded by noise and yet starved of truth. And the only antidote to this is the voice. the voice that refuses to look away from the persecuted, the forgotten, and the unseen. Simply knowing the truth is the first step, and speaking it is the next. And with that, I would like to end this video with a short verse from the Bible. In the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 5, "And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehend it not." Thank you for watching this episode of Deep Thought. I hope you found this video interesting, and if you did, please, for me, like, share and subscribe. And let me know in the comments your thoughts and any resolutions that you may have. And until next time, good night.